This is the Doorstep, sponsored by the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs, featuring Nicholas Gvosdev, Tatiana Serafin, and Asha Castleberry-Hernandez. This episode was recorded on July 8th, 2021.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Doorstep podcast. I'm your co-host, senior fellow here at the Carnegie Council, Nick Gvosdev.
And I'm Tatiana Serafin, also senior fellow here at Carnegie Council. Very excited today to welcome Asha Castleberry-Hernandez, senior advisor for the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs at the State Department, here today to talk to us about China and the Middle East, a topic that we don't hear enough of and need to hear more about. Asha, who previously served at the Kuwait desk as a Kuwait desk officer at U.S. Army Central. She worked on security cooperation with the OMC and the Kuwait Ministry of Defense. She served as senior key leadership engagement officer for the Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve in Iraq and Kuwait. And during the Obama administration, she previously served at the U.S. mission at the United Nations, working peacekeeping operations in the African continent. She currently serves as a major in the U.S. Army Reserves. Clearly, she knows what she's talking about. And best of all, she is with us today as a former member of the U.S. Global Engagement Team. So Asha worked with Nick and myself previously on what we're doing here today is bringing our audience, you all listening today, information that you need to know in your daily life from around the world that is going to impact your daily life. And so today we start off with China. And what is China doing in the Middle East, Asha, that we need to know about and we need our audience to know about?
Yes, thank you so much, Tatiana, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you so much, Nick and Alex, for having me again. I'm so excited to join everyone. And yes, this topic is very important that we share with Doorstep to learn about the impacts or developments of the PRC in the Middle East and North Africa.
Now, China just recently celebrated its 100-year anniversary of the Communist Party in July 1st. So this is such a timely topic as well. Some of our audience may have heard about the celebrations, heard about what President Xi is doing. But what is China doing in the Middle East to increase its footprint specifically? What are some of the things that you're looking at specifically?
Yes, well, the PRC is primarily increasing its footprint in the Middle East through growing economic ties with the region. The Middle East remains one of the top destinations of PRC foreign investment and is one of the few areas where investment continues to grow as China scales back in other less profitable regions. Also, energy dominates the PRC's economic ties to the Middle East. So China imports nearly 3/4 of the crude oil in six countries in the Gulf, mainly Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Oman, and Kuwait and UAE and Iran, accounted for nearly half of China's 2019 crude oil imports. So also too, China is rapidly becoming the top consumer for Middle East oil. So for instance, in 2020, Saudi Arabia sent 25% of its crude oil to China, which is up to 13.6% from 2014 to 2019. Saudi exports to the United States were only about 6% of its 2020 total. And lastly, beyond energy, countries across the Middle East are eager for capital and investment to build the infrastructure, mainly involved with the BRI, the Belt and Road Infrastructure Initiative, to increase job growth and provide economic growth and opportunities for the region. So the BRI pretty much enables a lot of China's economic, technological, energy, infrastructure activities in the region. Mm-hmm.
So for sure, I think our audience, and we all know about oil, right? Energy, oil, we can see that. Could we talk about, and I wonder if you believe also it's an activity of most concern to the US, this Belt and Road Initiative. So China began it in about 2013. It's going to take trillions of dollars. And it's actually, if you look at the map, and so if we could look at a map, what China wants to do is really increase an infrastructure, so both land and sea, from China all the way to Europe and Africa, across the Middle East. And I think that we need to look at the map more often to see the scale of this initiative, and the fact that you're also raising it as an area that the US might be interested in looking at. We know that when the G7 met, they created this whole big infrastructure plan, what was it? Build the world back better. Nick, do you remember it?
Something along those lines.
Something like that. So clearly we're trying to tackle infrastructure plan with infrastructure plan. Where is China? And is that an activity of the most concern to the US in terms of this big infrastructure project across the entire Middle East?
Yes, that's a good point. So when you look at, again, their energy ties, China has a high demand to meet when it comes to energy consumption. So, so when you look at their ties or deals that they have with a lot of our partners in the region, it's mainly to build a lot of coal plants all throughout the region. And so what they do with that is they continuously pump exports, imports involving when it comes to coal production. And why is that a concern? Well, over time, it doesn't really help us meet the standards when it comes to the Paris Accord, where you're kind of keeping a lot of the countries locked in when it comes to coal production, and you're moving them away from renewable energy, which we have in the Paris Accord, where by 2060, we want to significantly reduce our carbon emissions, but it's very hard when you're locked into these high demanding coal production programs that they have going on with our partners.
So do you think that the coal production is the most significant concern for the US in terms of the Paris Agreement? Or are there other aspects of the infrastructure development that are also kind of something that you're looking at?
Well, you have that point, and also too with some of the infrastructure developments that we're seeing in the region, they tend to not necessarily meet the environmental standards. So it's like, not really taking into an account like the biodiversity, the water infrastructure that's located in these areas, or the terrain. There tends to be a less sensitivity on building on top of those type of biodiversity, water, terrain areas that you have to take into account when you're building something. So sometimes the environmental standards tend to be a little bit off, and we're seeing a lot of that when it comes to the BRI program in Africa, where there were some complaints from different BRI recipients, or from African nations, where over time these infrastructure developments associated with the BRI did not necessarily meet environmental standards, where there was just a disregard to the biodiversity, to other terrains, especially when it came to water supplies, where they were kind of locking out some of the flow of water. So we're also definitely concerned with that as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, this is all, I mean, what you're talking about there, Asha, about also governments, and that kind of leads into the next question, which is, you've already painted a picture that Middle Eastern energy producers, they're selling more to China, they're looking to China for investment, but then there are what the Chinese do, the strings that they attach. And of course, we have a number of security partners in the region, in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, and others. How receptive are you finding the Middle Eastern states to these Chinese proposals? Are they embracing the Chinese? Are they concerned? Are they looking to us and saying, what can you do? So, I mean, what's your sense of how the Chinese proposals are being received by the governments of the Middle East?
Okay, thank you for the question. Well, the truth is it varies. Like all countries pursuing their own national interests, the Middle East states are receptive to PRC proposals when they perceive it benefits them. The PRC's infrastructure projects can be helpful to countries needing low-cost development. And also the PRC remains a major trading partner for many Middle East, North African countries, and it's logical to expect them to build upon mutual profitable relationships. So at the end of the day, we want our partners to be clear-eyed about the risk of doing business with the PRC and its companies. So we believe investment in any country should occur within strong regulatory structures and not undermine the host country's national security. So governments and the people in the region know, right, that partnerships with the United States bring tangible benefits to the people of the region. So, another example too, the PRC, they always, even in their constitution, they always emphasize non-interference in domestic affairs of states, which is used to justify their human rights abuses, right, in the name of the regime security. It can be enticing to governments who commit to human rights abuses to remain in power. However, our partners know that only the United States is capable of building effective regional security partnerships and bringing stability to the region. Mm-hmm.
No, and I think that's a great point that you've highlighted there, that the U.S. is the one with the track record, but also, frankly, with, if I can borrow the infrastructure word from Tatiana, we're the ones who can develop sustainable regional security infrastructures. So this leads in, I think, into the next question, and perhaps you've already anticipated it, which is, do we see some of these Chinese efforts as a problem for us? And I guess that in a way you've already alluded to this, that if the Chinese efforts are designed to disrupt those regional partnerships and disrupt regional security, certainly we would have an issue. But are there other things of concern that we look at and say, that this would be a problem, that China's activities are disruptive rather than constructive in how we see the region? Is this a problem for us?
Yes, that's a good question. It is a problem for the United States. First and foremost, it undermines the rule-based international system that has enabled our security and prosperity for over 75 years. So when you're talking about, restoring human rights, also being a transparent and genuine player with international organizations, we're seeing that sometimes the PRC tends to erode or chip away those principles involving the rule-based international system. So that's very, very important to note. Also, it undermines our commitment to human rights and democratic values, which I said before, that the PRC's emphasis, again, on sovereignty and non-interference is designed to undermine the universality of human rights and international law. And one example of that clearly is when you're seeing in the involvement of the Uyghurs. So when you have the issue involving the Uyghurs, that is a discussion all the time when you look at the UN Human Rights Council, and other countries, especially countries in the Middle East, North Africa, are paying attention to those developments. But because China is a growing influential player in the international system, and they're not necessarily communicating effectively on what exactly is going on with the Uyghurs, it tends to, provide some sort of not genuine messaging about the issue involvement of genocide in their country. So, and that becomes influential when it comes to many countries around the world, especially in the Middle East, North Africa.
That's so interesting. We have to really look also at this issue from the implications for what is going to go on for U.S. Our domestic audience. How does this part of the world impact what we do here? And how will what is China doing in the Middle East impact us here? Do you find that their efforts either in the energy department or in the infrastructure department, what we talked about, or their human rights. Do you find that people are talking about it here, or how should we be talking about it with our audience? What are some of your thoughts?
Well, I would say for the most part, definitely talk about it with the audience, especially when you could connect it to us domestically. So a perfect example of it is definitely when it comes to our health security involving COVID-19. As you can see, the early developments involving COVID-19, there was a lot in terms of what China was communicating to the World Health Organization. And right about now, that's under investigation. Well, we always have to remember, where did COVID-19 come from? It came from abroad. And we have to always remember that we are not in this world alone. We are interconnected. Our national security threats can come from outside of our country and go beyond into our borders and hit us hard, like what COVID-19 did. So when we're talking about our health security or global health overall, that definitely connects the involvement of foreign policy, national security, and how that drives at home with us when it comes to impacting our health. Especially a great example of that is COVID-19. So, and then now you're also seeing the production of vaccines, right? And a lot of them are coming from the Chinese as well as coming from the United States. And you're seeing vaccine distribution or diplomacy happening throughout the world. So we also want to make sure that we're monitoring how that impacts us at home, where we're receiving vaccines at home, but this administration has also been able to provide a distribution around the world as well. So that's important that we communicate these type of issues to the audience in the United States.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, sorry, Nick, go ahead.
No. I think that's a great point again about how something that happens overseas has the domestic impact. And of course, we'd be remiss at the doorstep if we didn't mention, Asha, that you were one of the progenitors of this concept and talking about these issues back at the Carnegie Council in 2018 about how important you saw it to communicate how national security impacted people in their day-to-day lives. And I think certainly the pandemic has brought that message home. Tatiana, please.
Following along that, you mentioned vaccine diplomacy, and I'm wondering, what is China doing in your area, and what are you monitoring in terms of vaccine diplomacy? Because I think that is one way they're trying to increase connections in the region. Is that correct?
Yes, they are aggressively conducting a vaccine diplomacy activities throughout the region, and they're also trying to have set up or establish production centers in several countries. So the Sinopharm right now, they're aggressively trying to offer it to to most of the Middle East, North African countries. And so it's definitely interesting to see how aggressive they're actually trying to implement the vaccine diplomacy approach, because it's almost coming off as if they know that the coronavirus was a issue that came out of their country, so they're trying their best to address the issue by being engaged in the vaccine diplomacy approach. Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that we that directly relates to what we're doing here and what you're working on is, and we can look at it with the vaccine distribution. Our Chinese foreign policy, US foreign policy in vaccines in other areas is important, as you mentioned, as we talk about in Doorstep, for the middle class, for the people here that are part of our economy and driving our economy here, will drive the recovery here. What is going on, or what are you following in terms of the connections between our recovery here and the recovery in the Middle East, and how China is trying to drive the recovery, and how what they're doing in the Middle East might impact what's happening here?
Well, I could definitely comment about what we're doing. We are definitely scaling our vaccine production for the world. We're working with manufacturers to increase vaccine supplies both at home and abroad. We had agreed upon the administration to make sure that that certain countries, especially developing countries, receive these vaccines. So it's been driving by the aggressive actions and have been taken to accelerate manufacturing production lines in the United States. So the Pfizer and the Moderna have already been increased in their capacity to produce vaccines for the world. Also, we are investing in local vaccine productions. Like I mentioned before, we're working with partners from the pharmaceutical companies and other manufacturers to expand local vaccine production investments globally. So the Quad Vaccine Partnership, I'm not sure if you guys are aware of, between the United States, India, Japan, and Australia is committed to expanding local production for at least 1 million safe and effective doses of COVID vaccines in 2021 and 2022. And now that we are engaged with both local and abroad distros, we're seeing with our partners, they're definitely more inclined to want to use our vaccines. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was actually reading that in the UAE is offering a booster with the Pfizer vaccine to its people to kind of after the Chinese vaccine. I thought that was really interesting. Speaking of vaccine diplomacy, so we talked about energy, we talked about infrastructure, we talked about vaccines. What other doorstep issues should we be considering or looking at from your region that you're seeing, maybe issues bubbling up, with, I don't know, we talk a lot about here about maybe tech or, space. Is there anything other issues that you're looking at following?
Yes, well, I just want to be very clear that the president has made it clear that the United States views the PRC as a competitor that challenges the existing international rule-based order. And our relationship with China will be competitive when it should be, collaborative when it can be, and adversarial when it must be. So the common denominator is the need to engage the PRC from a position of strength. That requires working with allies and partners and not denigrating them, because our combined weight is much harder for the PRC to ignore. So when you see like other activities, like you mentioned, like for instance, the Iran nuclear weapons, nuclear program negotiations, that's where we work also with cooperating with China to make sure that, that we're committed, that we're getting Iran committed to nuclear non-proliferation commitments. So that's really important where we cooperate with them. They're also cooperative. We also cooperate with them when it comes to, the Paris Accord as well. Also, they've been pretty instrumental as far as trying to bring peace and security in Yemen. So, so again, this relationship can be cooperative, then there's also adversarial, and then it could be also competitive. So it's in like 3 different buckets. And it also requires engaging in diplomacy and international organizations. So I definitely want to underscore that, because where we have pulled back, the PRC has filled in. So it is very important in this administration that we're engaged with strategic engagement around the world. And it requires us standing up for our values when human rights are abused, like what we're seeing, when it comes to the Uyghurs. And when our democracy is trampled in Hong Kong, because if we, when that issue too, because if we don't stand up for that, then that's going to create a bigger problem in terms of human rights abroad. So I just want to make sure that that's very clear, that when it comes to human rights as a doorstep issue, not only we're addressing that at home, but we're also very engaged abroad. So there's no hypocrisy here. The United States is engaged on what they're trying to do at home. It's the same thing we're trying to do abroad. So I think that's also a very important doorstep issue too, is ensuring that we are restoring our human rights.
We know that from the surveys that we've been doing, human rights matter to people. both that we're trying and that we're trying to help others in that regard. So I think that's a great point to stress. And as you also have noted, we're dealing in a very complex environment in the Middle East where and around the world where we're dealing with a competitor where we have to, in areas where we can collaborate, as you said, we can, but at the same time, where we need to stand up and kind of enforce certain things, we're prepared to do that as well. Definitely means that you're staying very busy. You're also, of course, as you've already noted, you pointed out before talking about allies and partners. You're dealing in that region of the world where our Euro-Atlantic and our Indo-Pacific partners both have roles to play, as well as our allies and partners in the Middle East region. So in some ways, you're in a keystone part of the world that connects these different areas, these global partnerships that the United States, as you had noted, constructs for the benefit of the world community. So certainly a lot on your plate, and you've given us a real overview of what's going on and what's occupying your time there. So definitely we appreciate what you've the time you were able to take from your schedule today to speak with us and to speak with our listeners. And I guess if there's any last points, anything else that we need to address, but I think you've given us a lot of things to discuss and to think about.
Yeah, thank
Absolutely.
you so much.
No, this was a great discussion, and I really enjoyed our discussing in several topics that we went over. But for the most part, it's very important that when we look at the international system overall, that we have a lot of emerging topics, but for the most part, great power competition is reshaping the international system, and United States is engaged, and we will respond effectively when it comes to near peer competition. But for the most part, our overall message to everyone is to make sure that we achieve international stability or peace and security. That's part of our international rule-based order. That's part of our principles. And for the most part, everybody needs to be aware of this, especially when you look at it where we're engaged in the competition involving, research and development, where we want, when it comes to the American people, we have to make sure that they're also involved in this competition as far as making sure that we invest a lot in R&D. I think that's important to understand as well. We were seeing over in the Hill where Senator Schumer had recently introduced a piece of legislation known as the Innovation and Competition Act, where we're going to be pouring a lot of money in R&D to ensure that the United States invests in a lot when it comes to STEM education. Not only that makes us more updated or stronger at home, but also competitive abroad. So that's really important, especially when you're looking in the technological domains as far as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, cloud computing. So we definitely are, when it comes to this administration, and also we're seeing a lot of bipartisan spirit in Congress, where we want the American people to not only be competitive or more updated at home, but competitive abroad as well.
I think that's a great way to sum it up, right? That in the end, the goal is to be stronger at home and to be competitive abroad.
Yes.
I love it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much again for taking the time out and for walking us through these issues. And again, to whenever your time or schedule permits, we always would love to have you back on a future edition of Doorstep. But again, we thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to The Doorstep, sponsored by the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs. For more, go to carnegiecouncil.org. Stay healthy and safe.